by two. Marauder, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
My God, it's full of stars.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your big host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined from that mean green mother from outer space, Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing? You okay?
Feed me. I'm doing fine. How are you doing?
I'm not too bad. Yeah, I was. I've been sort of not feeding the plants. I've been following the rules. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, today we are going to be doing a musical special. I'm looking forward to this one. This is.
Does that mean we get to sing?
I will be. I'm pretty sure at some point I will be breaking into a sort of a Steve Martin song at least, which is one of my favourites in this film.
Oh, yeah.
We are talking about 1980. I'm going to check now. 1986, 87 musical Little Shop of Horrors. More than that, I'm going to check something. Director's cut or theatrical cut? Which did you watch?
I watched the director's cut for the first time through. And I have to thank you on air because I grew up with this movie. I watched it as a kid. I had the soundtrack as well as other Menken stuff on, pretty heavy play when I was a teenager. And I never knew about the alternate ending. And it was talking with you that informed me of the alternate ending, went back and rediscovered my love for this film. So this was the first time I watched the director's cut with the alternate ending fully integrated.
Yes, so that's what I've got. I've got the Blu-ray set here to reference. It's a very different film for the director's cut. And so, listeners, just so you know, spoilers. Obviously, we always get into these films, but many people will remember this very differently to some of the discussions we're going to be having. And yeah, just this is put into perspective. So we are talking about Little Shop of Horrors. In the when this was made, Frank Oz, he put together an ending, and we will discuss the ending soon enough. However, the studios did a test screening, and people thought it was too much of a downer ending. They didn't really like it. They were very sort of it didn't give them what they wanted. It gives me what I want, I'll tell you that much. But I didn't give them what they wanted, so they had to go back and reshoot an ending for this film. And the ending you get in the theatrical versions are a lot quicker. It resolves very, very quickly. It's the ending I knew for years. And also, the song Don't Feed the Plants isn't used until the credits. That's used in the director's cut. But it also ends on a much, much happier note all round. However, to me, it has a slightly different has a very different moral implications for the rest of the film.
Absolutely.
And especially for the character played by Rick Moranis, Seymour Krelborn. And so watching the director's cut, I was going to ask this really. Did watching the director's cut then with the integrated ending, the original ending, did it change the rest of the film for you as well?
Well, apparently there are some minor changes along the way.
Yes, there are.
And having read about this, it seems that what happened was that in the original Broadway show, that this was not the original Roger Corman film from the 1960s, but the Broadway show had the down ending that they adapted and didn't work. And one of the reasons why it didn't work was Rick Moranis is likable and people like these characters. And so I think in the original version, I felt like, Rick Moranis is kind of a doofus, but he's a lovable doofus. And I think this version, I feel much more aware of the Faustian bargain that he's making all along the way and his culpability in those crimes. And I think that even though both versions preserve innocence for him in both murders, right?
Yes.
So it's convenient that the dentist dies of an overdose, as he's there with a gun,
Yeah.
to kill him. I kind of hate that. And that what's his name, Mr. Mushnick.
Yes.
Sort of like the Audrey 2 kills Mr. Mushnick himself, sort of pulling in the tentacles.
Mhm.
But so Rick Moranis remains kind of innocent, but it's darker in the director's cut. I think you see a little more of him chopping up the body.
Yeah.
So you're just like more conscious of the fact that he's chopped up a human being and fed it to a plant.
Yeah, there's more of a culpability in the director's cut. He's definitely sort of like he went to kill Steve Martin, the dentist. And he doesn't stop or save Mr. Mushnick. Like, he could quite easily drag him out the way. Like, it shows him, like, he's close enough, and he's doesn't, basically, it's that sort of thing of, like, the Nolan Batman. I'm not going to kill you, but I'm not going to save you either. It's that thing. It's death by omission, if you will. But more than that, the scene in the I'm not sure I want to get into, because there's other things I want to get into, but there is a scene, there is a choice made in the director's cut which seals nails down that sort of coffin for Seymour, and that is what happens to Audrey 1.
Yes.
And I'd forgotten about it, because I watched this a while ago, and then I'd forgotten that bit. I remember the crazy ending after all the sort of stuff, but basically, let's just sort of get to this. Let's get to this alternative, because it does have an implication for a lot of other things. And some of the endings, like you said, there were slight edits, and some of the scenes are extended actually in the director's cut. But the key ending comes at the very ending, and what happens is Audrey 2 calls all the names are going to be Audrey 1, and she sees, and she comes home and she's shocked, and then basically
Audrey 1 being the girl love interest of
yes,
Seymour.
we should re-explain the plot. He basically attacks her, and Seymour saves her from being eaten, and they rush out of the thing, and you see there is blood on her wedding dress, or this dress she's wearing as a wedding dress, and it's all tatty and torn. In the original theatrical cut, she sort of like, she falls down, and then it's quite clearly a slightly different dress, but she's fine. She's sort of like ruffled, but she's fine. And then Seymour goes in and sort of confronts Audrey 2. In this version, the original version, or the alternate ending, she dies.
Yeah, he pulls her out of the jaws.
Yes,
but the dress is torn. There's blood. She's mortally injured, and they have a farewell, a beautiful farewell conversation.
But her choice, and he follows up on it, is for her to be fed to Audrey 2, so that she can still be around him in some weird way. And then she dies.
And also to further his fame, right? Because Audrey 2 has brought him such fame that she loves him and wants him to be a success, Yeah. It's very sad, right?
It is. It's done well. I mean, it's very good. But then he goes back into the shop. He carries Audrey 1 back into the shop and literally feeds her to Audrey 2. And they have this sort of like slow sort of scene of her being taken into the jaws of Audrey 2. And it's really sort of like, it's not quick. It lasts minutes. Like, it's there for 4 or 5 minutes, this scene. It's long. And you're a bit like, this is like really like, uncomfortable sort of thing from Seymour's perspective. And
he lingers to hold her hand as the deer disappears into it's really clear that he is screwed up by what he's watching.
And that's the point. That's the thing. That sort of this ending sort of tells me more than anything, like the damage this has all done. Because then he actually sort of, it breaks him. He's like, no, I can't do this anymore. And he runs to go to commit suicide. He goes to throw himself off a building, and he's actually stopped by a no-name actor, if I can remember, in the director's cut. It's actually James Belushi in the theatrical cut, who says, look, I took a cutting of it, and I have here a mini Audrey 2, and we're going to sell them all across America. And, you know, and that's when he goes back and he confronts Audrey 2, and they get the Mean Green Mother song. And then we get the fact that Audrey 2 eats Seymour.
Yes, they have a confrontation in which Audrey 2 tears the house down around him.
Yeah.
And ultimately, you know, and beats him up. It's really quite vicious. Shoots a gun at him, you know, as he's singing the Mean Green Mother song.
One of the things to note there, which again the first time I noted this, the gun appears in both versions.
Mm-hmm.
However, in the director's cut, Seymour fires it twice at Audrey 2, and then gets the gun taken off him. In the theatrical cut, he doesn't fire at all. So Seymour never, in this film, in the theatrical cut, never discharges a weapon or anything to cause people harm or anything other harm. They try and keep him as innocent as possible, culpable but innocent.
Yeah.
And in the director's cut, like you say, he sort of crossed that line, and he fires twice, and then Audrey 2 takes it off him, and it becomes a silly Hollywood gun of multiple bullets and stuff.
So in the theatrical cut, you have Audrey being conveniently saved, and then it goes directly from there into the conflict between Seymour and Audrey 2. It preserves some of the footage of Audrey 2 tearing the house down around them, and ultimately, all of a sudden, Rick Moranis, you know, Seymour, finds a live wire, charges Audrey 2, and you get a green screen shot that's not very good, in which Audrey 2 just explodes.
Yes.
And then you get the sort of saccharine ending of the two of them going off together, and they have essentially gone into her fantasy sequence from Somewhere That's Green, where they're in the sort of silly, you know, Levittown 1950s house. And a little bit of ambiguity is preserved, that there's like a little Audrey 2 out front, but he gets the ultimate happy ending. But even that is, you know, completely silly, because they're literally in her fantasy. You know, I mean, it's like the movie is telling you this is an unrealistic fantasy, but it's what you want to see, assholes.
It really feels like Frank Oz giving a bit of a middle finger, and I've never thought of that until watching this. Again, I felt the same. I was watching this and thinking, like, yeah, Frank Oz didn't want to make this. Like, this is clearly reluctantly made, because it happens so fast. Like, that whole ending sequence is like, done. Right, we're out. But the other thing from the alternate end, or the original ending, is the plants win. And there is a sort of a prolonged sequence throughout the song, Don't Feed the Plants, of them taking over. Multiple Audreys all over America. And it is absolutely brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it apparently cost $5 million at the time, you know, so I can't say it looks like $1 million, but it's amazing, and it is so much fun. You know, if anybody out there has not seen it, you know, it's on YouTube. You can track it down, even if it's not supposed to be on YouTube. And not only is the death of Audrey slow, and you see her dead body being devoured, and you know, this goodbye, but then Seymour's death is also slow, and you see, you know, there's this sort of like, oh my God, are they really going to do this? That you feel as he's being drawn into the maw, and you're like, oh no, it seems like they're really going to do this, and then you're like, oh, he's in the job. No, they're doing this. And then he disappears. And even then, the camera lingers on Audrey 2 as Audrey 2 burps and spits out his broken glasses. And then, I mean, it's so brilliant. I mean, to me, the whole alternate ending is so brilliant from start to finish, in the sense of inevitability.
Yes.
That, you know, I mean, it is so right that you realize that one of the most famous songs in probably musical history, Somewhere That's Green, is a Chekhov's gun for this ending, for the reprise of Somewhere That's Green is inside Audrey 2. That's where she's going to go. It's, that's a Chekhov's gun that doesn't fire. And then, you don't notice because it's one of these, fantasy intent classical musical numbers. But it's got this added payoff that is completely stripped from it. And everything about that final ending, the real ending, from Audrey 2 dying and the inevitability of that to his suicide, which is another, his attempted suicide, which is another like shocking, wow, he immediately, it makes sense that would come immediately after. It's interrupted by this news. It makes sense that he would then run and go straight into this conflict. And then to be devoured and you're like, oh my God. And then this sequence is so shocking of, this wonderful miniature stuff and, so many creative, like Mars Attacks, creative destruction moments. And I mean, I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. It's such an electric ending.
Like I say, Mars Attacks is a really good example. It's a really good comparison because it keeps doing. Every time you go, oh, they're not going to do that. Oh, they are, and they're going to go do something else. It just keeps going with those things, and I think it's absolutely. It's just so well done. It's so well presented. Like you said, the puppetry is fantastic. The humor is dark, and it plays so well with the music. The songs are fantastic. Like I said, the whole we'll get into when we go recycle back to the beginning. We'll go through all, but I just want to say the alternate ending. The one thing for me is the reason I wanted to talk about it first. Have it a little bit asked about Fate, and there is a reason. Is because to me, watching it made me realise, firstly, that theatrical ending was a cheap knockoff that Frank Oz clearly didn't want to make. But the director's cut is a complete film.
Mm-hmm.
Whilst I feel the theatrical version is fun and that ending, it all works. I love it. It's it's a fantastic film. I've always loved it. But this alternative ending, this director's cut ending, like you said, there's so many payoffs and all these things. It just feels like so much more of a piece. That dark humor, that I don't want to say mean-spiritedness because I don't want to say it's mean-spirited, but there's a real sort of like edge to some of the thing,
It feels transgressive. You understand perfectly why that did not work.
Yes,
I mean,
in '87,
right. I mean, you can understand how shocking that would have been. I mean, kids, we did Transformers the movie, and I was thinking of that with how much I love the sort of like percussive forward momentum of that song over, Don't Feed the Plants, over these scenes of carnage and destruction. And the same point that I made about how things feel inevitable, as a writer, I have this big concern for sequencing, right? Mm-hmm. Like you see the civilians running back and forth and and everything keeps escalating, right? You want things to be presented in an escalating fashion. So you don't start with a building being destroyed. You start with, smaller threats, and then you escalate to buildings being torn apart and a subway car going into a maw of Audrey and they're laughing hysterically as they're demolishing this sense of escalation. And then you go to the military response, and too many times these days in films, they start with a military response and then you get the quiet moments. And I think, what's going on with the military now? Everything is just so perfect about that ending. So, as to why it didn't work, I was thinking of Transformers, the movie, about kids crying at Optimus Prime dying. This was a movie that people took their kids to see, right? It's a Rick Moranis comedy about a talking plant. Can you imagine the kids crying as these characters slowly die? And then they watch everyone get murdered.
So this was because it's a 12 now, and 12. So this was reclassified when it was released on Blu-ray. So the theatrical version is a PG in this country. I think it's a PG in the States. The theatrical version is a 12. Sorry, the director's cut is a 12, which tells you sort of like they had to reclassify the film. That's how it sort of works. But you're right. I mean, it was 86. It was released. Just to sort of correct myself, but it's this thing of, like you say, even the branding of this is Rick Moranis, Steve Martin, John Candy, all these actors that you've gone, oh, I know them from Saturday Night Live. They're comedy actors. It's a Broadway show. It's a musical. It's got Frank Oz. He does the Muppets.
Mm-hmm.
Like, everything about this film tells you this is supposed to be a family film. And I can imagine those executives sitting down in that first sort of audience screening and seeing that ending and being like, what have we got? Like, what the hell have we done? But I think it even happens before then. So this was the point I wanted to make, because the ending, I think, changes a lot of the film.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm going to go back to the beginning now. Okay, let's go back to the beginning. So, we've talked about the director's cut, so we know what was going to happen. And so the plot of the film is very simple. It's Rick Moranis picks up that he, Mr. Mushnick, and Audrey, they all live in Skid Row, which is a known place in Los Angeles.
Except it's New York in this version.
This is New York in this version, but Skid Row is a known sort of, it's where the lowest of the lowest, real poverty-stricken area. And he runs a florist, which is the bizarrest choice in this area. And Rick Moranis is sort of like an orphan who was sort of Mushnick has sort of brought him up a little bit and given him a job. And anyway, he finds a rare plant, he believes to be a rare plant, and calls it Audrey 2. It then brings people
during a total eclipse.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, which is a great little sequence. I love that song. And then the plant, and again, I love the way this film is played into silliness. Like they say, they put Audrey 2 in the window, and then straight away someone comes in and says, "Hey, excuse me, that's a fascinating plant you have in the window, and whilst I'm here, I'll buy 12 roses." That sort of thing. And eventually the word spreads, they become more famous, and Audrey 2 grows bigger and bigger. And but the secret that he's keeping is that Audrey 2 needs blood to survive and to grow. And so he's sacrificing his own fingers to begin with, and eventually Audrey 2 gets to such a size that she has to have, it doesn't really matter really, the plant has to have full bodies, human bodies, and so got it, it gotta be bloody, it gotta be fresh.
Yeah.
And so, he then sort of like, he goes out to kill, and through circumstances, he feeds Audrey 2 until it all comes to sort of like the secret comes out and everything towards the end, which we've talked about. What I want to sort of mention is, there's two things actually I want to sort of throw out about the inevitability. The song Skid Row.
Mm-hmm. So
you get the sort of the Little Shop of Horror song, which opens, and you get the sort of the other thing we'll talk about, which is the sort of the Grecian choir sort of, which I love. Great little, it's a fantastic part. But the song Skid Row,
played by three black girls, sort of like echoing the Supremes and,
yes,
and black groups from that era.
But the song Skid Row goes through and it gives you this sort of render, this thing on why Skid Row's crap, and it gives you these little snippets of the characters. And we'll get into Audrey as a character in a little bit, and her backstory and the tragic backstory she has. But the last verse of Skid Row, I've got it in front of me here. It says, "Gee, sure would be swell to get out of." I'm not going to sing, don't worry. Get out of here. Bid the gutter farewell and get out of here. I'd move heaven and hell to get out of here. I don't know what to get out of here, but a hell of a lot to get out of Skid Row. People tell me there's no way out of Skid, but believe me, I gotta get out of Skid Row. And that final verse of that song at the very beginning of the film tells you straight away that they are gonna do anything. And so when you watch the director's version and him actually going along with Audrey's request to be given to the plant, I fully accept that sort of there's still a part of Seymour that's like, I'm going to feed this body into Audrey 2, and then I'm going to sustain the fame, and I'm going to get out of Skid Row because I am going to do anything. And I feel like that's like a real turning point where, like, this again, you said about the payoffs. That verse meant more to me watching the director's cut than watching the theatrical cut. Because in the theatrical cut, there's choice to not get out of Skid Row and to sort of, they do, because they have the horrible twee ending, as we said.
Yeah.
But that choice that he makes to sort of use Audrey's body and feed it to Audrey too feels more in line with what this song is telling me at the very beginning of the film.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I think that the theatrical ending to me feels like it would almost work in the director's cut as a fantasy sequence of Audrey after Seymour proposes marriage, but before Audrey 2 gives her the phone call, right?
Yes.
As she's preparing to leave with Seymour, and it's like, this is what it's going to be like. We're going to have our house, you could almost save that footage. So that's how sort of sickening and saccharine and out of place with reality it is compared to the rest of the film. And you were talking about sort of Skid Row, and I was very taken, especially on this viewing, of how racially diverse the Skid Row is presented as, and this presentation of right away you get into domestic violence.
Yeah.
Audrey's boyfriend is hitting her. And you have the downtown song about poverty and how we're all traveling to basically serve Starbucks to rich people, and going back to these horrible conditions. And this is so obviously prescient. It's so relevant to our times, but it also gets at what good musical can do. And I'm a big fan of musicals. Good musicals have this ability to address social issues and address themes in a way that oftentimes could not be done in contemporary cinema and mainstream works, that you couldn't address some of these issues. But if you put them in a musical, it's like, well, South Pacific can address interracial relationships in a way that you couldn't get away with in the mainstream, because it's like, oh, it's a musical, it feels good, So that kind of like wrapping it in with that nice bow of a musical lets you get at those issues. And this is a dark movie right from the start. And those themes are dark. The themes about Americana, Better Homes and Gardens, and, the American dream and what this has to say about it are really complex and fascinating. And I think all of that gets polished over in the theatrical version.
Yes, and that's the thing. I think it does. It tries to sort of give you, because again, you said about the inevitability of this film. Like, it's no mistake this is set in Skid Row. That's the point. It's in this idea, this whole thing about got to get out of Skid Row. Like, it's the fact that they do in the theatrical version. It is almost counter to the rest of the tone of the film. Because of what they've done. And so, like I say, when you watch the director's cut, you do go, oh, okay, that is much more in line. Like, this is inevitable. They were never going to win. It's always going to be this way. They can't do this. Something's not going to let them. But even like Audrey, as you said, like, she has a verse in that song, and she sort of talks about the guys on Skid Row. And she, like I say, from the offset of the film, like, you look, I won't find the lyrics again, but like, there's a verse where she's like, yes, guys, they'll hit you and they'll talk down to you, and I wish I could find a guy. And you're like, obviously they have again, like you said, it gives you this way of addressing them without really addressing it if you don't want to see it. But that thing again, where you have Audrey and Seymour coming together at that corner and sort of talking about saying about how to get out of Skid Row. And they're obviously going to get together. That's the point. But Audrey, in this film is a true victim. And it's from the very beginning. I'm like, again, watching this time, really listening to things to try and understand things a bit better, give it that analytical eye. Straight away, I'm like, Jesus Christ! Like, this film is telling me that she's beaten on a regular basis. Like, even before you meet the dentist and stuff, like, and it starts then with her going into work for the first day with a black eye.
That's how you first meet her.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, you've told me this. And then obviously that's when it goes into the song. You're like, you're telling me this. Like, this is how this film is going to play out. And Steve Martin being Steve Martin, like, you know, you've seen The Jerk, you've seen Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, you know, he's funny. And he is funny in this. Like, I love him in this. He's fantastic. But there's also several scenes where you're a bit like, yeah, I know this is a comedy, but like the implications. Yeah, the implications. Not the fact he's a monster, because he is, but even though the physical implications, you know, she falls off the motorbike and he rides off.
Yeah,
and she's
that is a crucial scene there, right?
And then she's struggling to open the door to the flat or to the apartment, and he's sort of there going like, you know, come on, get into that flat, woman. I'm gonna smack you. Like, you know, he's a true sadist.
First of all, he's left her behind.
Yeah.
She's got to run, having fallen off his bike. She's got to run to catch up with him. And then he says, "You're stupid for falling off the bike." No concern for her safety. And then says, "Open the door." As she's struggling, obviously nervously with this, you know.
Terrified. She is terrified in that
Yes.
scene.
And she's struggling with the keys, you know, with this pressure. And he says, like, "Hurry up, you slut."
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah. He is, but you know, and you think, okay, maybe you're gonna be left with that because that's bad enough, but it doesn't. It goes in and you get the sort of rear window, you get the silhouette, and he does. He sort of like he tells her to get basically S&M gear ready, and then slaps her, and you're just like, it's all playing into a part because this is all obviously that scene happens whilst Audrey 2 is manipulating Seymour into saying, because it's that thing of like, you know, some people deserve to die. Go find me someone who deserves to die. Which is true, but like, you know, murder's still murder. But again, like that character sort of, and I like the way this film does it. It sort of lulls you into liking the character because it's Steve Martin.
Mm-hmm.
And his sort of his first real introduction is the sort of like, you know, Be a Dentist song, which I can probably sing verbatim. I won't, don't worry. But I love that song, and it's such a fantastically well done musical number, including like from, you know, the shot taken from inside a mouth, which is great.
Yes.
And so you're set up for this like, oh, he's a real weirdo, and then you're like, no, he is an absolute monster. Like he does deserve to die. And so this film sort of like serves you up something sweet in the sign of a song, like a catchy number that you're like, oh, I love this song. And then punches you in the gut with the realization of what it is you're actually being shown. And it's so written so well to do that. It is incredibly impressive.
Yeah. On the other hand, the likability of Steve Martin, just like the likability of Rick Moranis, sort of those actors kind of undercut some of what the film's trying to do, which I think contributes to that theatrical ending, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, if we look at this more objectively, even in the theatrical cut, Rick Moranis, Seymour, has still made his Faustian bargain. He's still, you know, a horrible guy. And the dentist is a horrible guy. But because they're, you know, it's hard to hate Steve Martin the way you want to hate a girlfriend beater, right?
But I think that's the point. I think that I almost think, I think this is part of what Frank Oz is trying to do. Like he's challenging you because he's saying like, I'm going to give you Steve Martin, and I'm going to give you him doing one of like, you know, like an Elvis number, like a crazy dentist Elvis number. And then I'm going to make you see what an absolutely vile person he is. And I challenge you to still, you know, enjoy. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think it's the same. I think that's why they cast Rick Moranis. I think Rick Moranis is, there's a part of me that thinks, yes, you know, should this be cast as someone who's a bit more schlubby? Should it be someone a bit more? I don't know. I couldn't think of someone to replace him, but it's this thing again of sort of, you're supposed to sort of feel for Rick Moranis, you know, for Seymour. He's supposed to be, he's a loser. Like everything in this everything in this film happens to him. You know, he has no real agency. You know, like he doesn't kill Steve Martin's dentist. He doesn't kill Mr. Mushnick. He doesn't kill Audrey. He feeds him back, and he makes that choice to do it. But he, like you said, he chops up the dentist, which is one thing. But like would he have actually fired the gun? You never know.
Right.
And so like nothing. He never actually does anything. Like he was willing to sacrifice himself. He's the one that's given his not in the big sense, but like to begin with, like, it's his fingers that are covered in bandages. Like he's feeding Audrey from his own blood. And even when he knows there's a danger, because when he goes on the radio station, and they're in the sort of the puppet that tries to bite, and again, I want to talk about the puppetry in this film at some point, but tries to bite the sort of the woman's bottom, and he sort of grabs it, and he knows there's a danger to this thing.
Exactly.
But he's still willing to sort of like, no, you can suck on my blood. That's it. Me giving up is okay. Mm-hmm. And it's so I think that's the point. If this character was too schlubby or too, I don't know, downtrodden or greasy or in the wrong vein, I don't think you get that same. You would expect him to kill someone, and you don't want to have to expect Seymour to have to do the thing. Because the other thing as well is, I think this film originally wants you to think you're going to get the theatrical ending. Right. Because the director's cut is supposed to pull you out of it. That's the point. Because, so it's almost like the theatrical ending gives you what the film is almost teasing you, and then you get it. Right. But the director's cut is like, I'm teasing you this, and I'm not going to give it to you because you're going to get this inevitability. And if you had like a more sort of greasy character, and you then got the theatrical ending, it would feel more like a cheat.
Yes. Well, I mean, which it is.
Yeah.
I mean, I want to make a comment about this and that dovetails to the points you were making about Skid Row, and also to sort of how Seymour is depicted and his character. I think that if you look at those two endings, they're incredibly different in the way they comment on or fulfill the themes of the movie. And I think that's what you're getting at. So, I mean, if we take the central themes that are set up at the beginning as sort of poverty, the American dream, with somewhere that's green and getting out of poverty, and also this concept of Seymour as you were saying, a sort of passive nice guy, that he's the nice guy as opposed to the dentist, right?
Yeah.
So the theatrical version says the American dream can be yours.
Yes.
Yes, you might make some horrible mistakes along the way. You might commit some crimes, but they are ultimately pardonable if you are a good guy and if you get rich.
Yes.
It will all be smoothed over. You will find your natural level and succeed. Right.
It's the 80s. Greed is good. Capitalist, dream achieved.
Right. Yeah. The only thing holding back the poor is really lack of initiative.
It's the same now. And this is what it felt for. I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's that thing again you hear now with they're not going to increase minimum wage, and people are like, well, you just need to work harder. That's the thing.
And we have people over here, on the right who say, well, hunger is a good motivator. And they're saying that about kids in schools who are being deprived of school lunches. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. But if it ever does. But I mean, we have, there are multiple versions of the American dream, but the most horrifying version is the idea that anybody can succeed. And if you fail to, it's just because of your Protestant failing. Mm-hmm. Right. And so I think that the original ending really gives a stamp of approval to those worst aspects of the American dream and of, look, you can escape poverty if you want to. Maybe he got a little lucky, but it is possible. And then it also gives a stamp of approval to this really what's come to be seen as toxic masculinity, this really horrible idea that the good guy deserves the girl.
Yes.
And we've seen that, whether it's Revenge of the Nerds, we've seen that in every movie. But here is this passive guy who was actually a classic nice guy, in the sense that he's actually an evil son of a bitch.
Mhm.
He is perfectly willing to compromise his principles. Is he better than the dentist? Sure. But, he probably can't think of hitting a woman. But at the same time, he is manipulative. He is more than happy to, to do horrible things. And he really doesn't know much about Audrey. He's not really interested in who she is as a person. He just thinks, I deserve her. I'm a good guy. I should be the one who gets the girl. And in the theatrical version, it again puts a stamp of approval on that really toxic idea that, if you're a nice guy, if you don't beat up women, you should get the hot girl at the end, or the love interest, or whatever. Whereas the real ending says, no, there's no escaping poverty. Screw your illusions. That nice guy is actually completely toxic, and he's going to get that girl killed. There's nothing good that's going to come out of this. There's not going to be a happy relationship for this passive, toxic, manipulative guy.
Well, no, I agree, because there's things in this film, again, I noticed watching it this time, and there may be times when you and I are going to say things like, I want to highlight right now, I love this film. Like, I'm a big fan of this film. It's like you, I listen to the soundtrack. I love the music. But there's little moments in this film now that I recognize and say, maybe it's just like you say, it's dated or whatever. But even naming it Audrey 2 is like a passive aggressive kind of pass at her. The way he says it, because he says, she's, oh, that's so cute. What is it? He says, well, I've called it Audrey 2. I don't. And she goes, oh, and makes that little noise. And it's like, it's for him, it's like a little victory. Oh, I've gained something so that's one in the win column. Boom. And so it's things like that you're like, like I say, there's no, he is being rewarded for being, like I say, passive, for being weak. Now that's not to say, you all have to be, super assertive and confident. That's not the point. But it's the little comments, little moments when you realise that, like, actually, Seymour's not a great guy either. Even the song that sort of hits it home.
No, he's a prick.
Yeah. The song where Audrey 2 manipulates him, that sort of like, some people deserve to die. When he talks about, and he says, like, I want a Harley machine. I'm trying not to sing Cruising Around Like I'm James Dean. Like, he has these images in his head. And, he says about going to the guys on the corner, making the guys on the corner turn green. And so he wants people to feel jealous of him. He wants to, and again, like, it's that thing of, I don't want to do not so much I don't want to do the work, but I have this vision, and this vision is it's not so much, that's a weird thing, it's not so much getting out of Skid Row. No point in that song does he say that his vision doesn't match up with Audrey's. Because Audrey's like, I want to go, like, say, someplace that's green. I want to go find a house. I want to have this family fantasy. The nuclear family,
white picket fence,
the white picket fence, all that. He's like, I want a Harley, and I want to tool around in Skid Row and make people jealous because I've got success. That's what I want to do. I want people to look up to me.
And so part of that is guys looking and saying, he's got that hot girlfriend, right? Yeah. She's an object. She's part of, the male fantasy of success.
And saving it. He wants to save it. He wants to be the savior. So it's that thing again of being the hero.
Another bad nice guy trait, right?
Yes, exactly. Like, I want to be the savior, but I want everyone to look up and be impressed by me. And it sort of comes out in that frustration and stuff. And so, yeah, it's that sort of like, it's almost, when's it going to be my turn kind of approach, isn't it? Well, that frustration. Well, when's it going to be my turn? And Audrey 2's going, well, I can give you all these things. I can give you a guest spot on Jack Parr. I can do all these kind of things that you want. You've got to do. You've just got to be a bit proactive. And so he fully goes with, when he goes carrying a gun with the intention of killing the dentist. But yeah, so I don't think. So I'm. Funnily enough, there are people listening to this that are probably going to be like, you're ruining this film for me.
Why? Because they love Seymour. And Audrey.
This is the thing, like, it's a great romance, or it's this is what it should be, but it's not, and that's and that's what I think. Yeah, this film really isn't that story, but not forgetting that that's how this film was marketed, and still is. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's a big difference between the theatrical and the real ending, and I think that when I was a kid, I'm sure I did not see Seymour as fatally compromised in any way. I only knew that theatrical cut. I saw him as, sort of, a little bit of a weak, shy guy. I saw that he was being presented that way. But, I was watching movies like Revenge of the Nerds, and I totally got the impression that, you stick it out and the nice guy wins. And those ideas did not survive long once I entered the dating world. And for good reason, because, that sort of stuff is very toxic. And I think that there are a lot of guys who think that they're nice. And a big part of being nice is I wouldn't hit someone. I wouldn't give you a black eye. Yeah, but you don't know anything about me. You don't really share my dream of a white picket fence. What do they really have in common except wanting to get out of there, and not having other options? Both of them have no other options.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Look, it becomes limiting, but also, like I say, this idea is the fact of the matter is, like you say, they sort of find each other because there's nobody else. And also, like you say, he is impressed by her. There's a great line later on when she gives more information about where she meets the dentist. I've just his name, Orin Scrivello is what it's called. And she says about she works in a club, and she was working like in the hours that she wasn't working at the florist, she was working somewhere else in this bar, in this club. Is it called the Gutter? That was it, isn't it? I met him in the Gutter, and that's the name, which is an apt name because she sees it as the lowest point. And she says that, I had to wear these tacky, horrible outfits, not like this classy thing she's wearing now. And it's obviously supposed to be that she's wearing this sort of like, bustier kind of dress that's forcing her boobs up on this other stuff. But again, like, you don't know. That's not revealed until pretty much the end. And you're like, oh, there's more to this. Like, you don't know what that club is. You don't know what she's had to do. What does that thing entail? Is it, I'm not going to say it's a brothel or anything like that, but like, how else has she had to how else has she been compromised by this life that she is trying to drive away from? So, and again, like,
every movie today has to get a prequel or a reboot, and they've talked about, a new Little Shop of Horrors. I think you have settled it that what we really need is an Audrey Year One story. That is just the darkest, what Audrey had to endure in that club prior to why does she see Seymour as such a possible way out? Why is she so desperate? We need 2 hours of the darkest shit imaginable.
I want it to be the most emo musical we've ever had. Like, but that, there's little things like that, like you say, that I didn't catch until this time. When you go, hang on, like why is she staying? And she also says because you say about the options, she says that about the dentist. Well, what else? At least I've got a fella. You're like, oh, so that's your position. Having to be with someone is your default position, and he just happens to be a doctor, And she's like, well, he's a doctor, and I'm like, yeah, clearly it doesn't work that way, but. Her mentality is fascinating. Of like, well, I've got to be in a relationship. I've got to be doing this. I've got to be doing that. She almost wants to see it as a way out, but it's clearly not.
Well, and I know people like that. I mean, to this day, I think that she comes off as the most dated of the characters because, obviously this is set in the 60s. The cars look old, but it has a sort of light touch with that. It was perfectly possible as a kid to sort of keep that in the back of my mind, but it's not front of mind. It's not a
Mhm.
period piece. And so she does come off as a little ditzy, a little not only is she interested in the sort of Better Homes and Gardens 50s, the disgusting manicured lawn, and two twin beds just like TV. There's a kind of like, innocence to her mentality that's sort
Yes.
of like a stereotypical kind of like squeaky, not too bright sort of stereotype of a woman. So I think that is the most dated. Although I do know a lot of people, I'm sure you do too, who just
Mm.
like don't seem to ever be able to not be in a relationship,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
will justify horrible relationship decisions based on like, well, this is what it is for now. I don't have a better option. It's like you're not gonna die if you have to live alone, But
Oh yeah. Yeah.
this
I've
was
had,
an
I've had
earlier.
I've had I've had friends that I've known in years past say things like, well, it's better than being single, and you're like, I'm not entirely sure that's the case. Like,
Yeah, you do nothing but complain about this person.
Yeah.
This is a horrible match. You're clearly miserable. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things to highlight as well is that Audrey, played by Ellen Greene, is, I think, the only one to come over from the Broadway musical. And so she obviously sort of nailed that. She knew the role, and I think and I think, like you say, she's dated. The film is set in 1963, just to confirm. So, and so she knows this character, and I think her background of having done it in the musical tells me that she's sort of she's done Audrey year one in her head, like like I think she gets it. And yeah, I find that's why I find it so fascinating, because there's so much depth to her, the clothes she wears, this image she wants to present. She's desperate to present to get out of Skid Row. Like, you see it more than anything when you hear the Downtown song at the very beginning. Like, it goes through all the people, and they're all very sort of archetypal, as you see that sort of 60s to 80s poor, sort of. You would see this in any other film, and she's the one that's got, like, the brightly colored dress and the sort of the accessories, the stiletto high heels, and she stands out like a sore bloody thumb in that dance number, in that song. And it's clear she presenting herself in this way is a way of her making herself feel better. Like,
A possible escape, right? To
Yes.
like, it's dress for the job you want, not the one you have. She's dressing for the life that she wants, with a white picket fence, rather than where she really is.
So yeah, and so her ending. So again, this thing of the theatrical ending versus the original ending, again, like, if you follow that path, what Audrey is looking for, again, like I say, her achieving it sort of undermines the sort of, like I said, the themes of what she's been doing throughout the film. But again, it's almost like, I don't, like you say, it rubber stamps certain things from her perspective as well, saying like, get yourself noticed by making yourself tart yourself up, and you'll, a good man will find you, or you can find these things, and it sort of it starts to cheapen some of the when you think about it, you scratch away, it starts to cheapen some of the characters. And I now understand why Frank Oz hated the ending so much. So yeah, no, that's why I find her so like, she is more interesting to me than Seymour. But yeah.
Well, we get less to go. We get less to go on with her, and I think you're right that there are those lines, like you pointed out, that imply there's a story there. I think that sometimes I feel like she's that ditzy sort of persona is taken too far, and maybe it's all an act, right? I mean, I've certainly, seen that as an act in real life. But then when she has, even in the good ending, when she dies, she says, "I want to be with you forever, Seymour. I want to put me in the plan.
Mm.
I will sacrifice myself for your fame and be able to be with you, you know, in some sort of spiritual, symbolic way as opposed to physically." Interesting to me that they pretty clearly have never had sex before Seymour proposes marriage.
Yes.
Super, super red flaggy. Okay. But yeah, I mean, I think that the way she sacrifices herself, even in that the good ending, while beautiful, and while it does sort of imply that if there is a way out of the ghetto for Seymour, it's going to have terrible pain. You know, you could imagine a version in which Seymour gets out and somehow the world isn't destroyed, but he is able to get out with all this money and just leaves Audrey too, and in which he is a success, but he is miserable. I mean, he's killed the only people he cared about to get to that position, and that the movie doesn't go that way, but that would also be a terrible comment on what it takes to succeed in a supposedly meritocracy, a supposed meritocracy. But I think the way that she sacrifices herself and is so eager not just to marry somebody, but to, you know, that's one thing. To change her dream to, well, I'll just be in this plant and you're the one that matters, you'll have success, does feel a little, it works symbolically, but it feels a little superficial of her as a character.
Yeah. She's taken that 180. Well, not 180. She's gone on it's a hard left turn, isn't it? Sort of like, you know. But then again, saying that, it maybe it's the way it's put together, but it doesn't feel wrong for her to make that decision because, as you say, she's always put herself after. You know, she's put other people first. You know, whether it be the terrible dentist or even Seymour. Like, she's looking to be in a relationship, and in this point, like, you know, she knows she's dying. There's nothing like that. So this thing again, it's the romanticism of it, isn't it? It's a romantic ideal. This idea of being together in this ideal. If I'm part of the plant, then we'll be together forever. It's a romantic ideal that sort of like, well, if I can't have the fantasy life, I can have that, you know, almost like a gothic romantic death. And so that it's that sort of, she's making that choice rather than yes, leave my body here in this sort of like trash strewn street.
Right. I mean, I agree with you. It feels right. Certainly, it feels right emotionally. It feels right symbolically. I do think that it would be augmented by, you know, some reference back to Skid Row, and I think that, you know, it wouldn't take much for her to say, you're clearly getting out of Skid Row, right? You're on the cover of Life magazine. This is how I'm finally going to get out, is inside Audrey 2, you know, going to Hollywood or whatever. You know, at least one of us got out, that kind of thing. And there are some of those themes that sort of aren't as delicately woven through the fabric of the musical as I'd like, even in the good version. Yeah.
No, I'd agree with that. I'd agree that more could be done to sort of capture that thought.
She's also, talking about depictions of gender, she's also almost raped by Audrey too. There is the implied rape scene.
Yes, when she first comes in and he sort of lifts her skirt up and that sort of thing.
And says, "Relax, darling, it'll be easier."
Yeah,
and it's talking about eating her, but there are tentacles menacing her and lifting up her dress. And
yes, it's an early sort of drift into hentai sort of you know, for American musicals. Well, let's talk about Audrey 2. You know, and this invasion plan. But Audrey 2 as a character, like you said, this Faustian deal, and the knowledge that sort of Audrey 2 has, or Chewie as they call it, is this ability to manipulate people and situations, this sort of thing of like, I know I can get you out of this. Like, me being unique is going to sort of lead to this situation. Feels, and we've talked about this before, like very coincidental as a plan. Like all these things have to fall into place for it to work. And so yeah, it's a bit like Audrey 2's plan feels a bit shaky as a plan, but I'm willing to forgive it. It's no problem. But what were your thoughts on that?
Well, yes, I have thought about that. I think it's not clear at all how Audrey 2 appears at quote unquote the old Chinese man's plant shop on the street. I'm not sure how that happens, and it seems as if the takeover plan is dependent on somebody giving it blood, and then also somebody else taking cuttings, and also that person who gives the blood escalating to larger things. And in the the sort of patent-like flag that begins the sort of final insane carnage sequence in the final musical number, you're told, subsequent to the events that have been depicted, this awkward phrasing that's done for comedic effect, that very similar events occurred out. And I think, yeah, how many people are going to fall for this? I also wonder, like, how Audrey 2 becomes Audrey 2 is sort of depicted like a puppy in early scenes. It's sort of like looking but has no eyes, has no ears. How did Audrey 2 absorb the culture enough to like get all of these pop culture references and But at the end of the day, I don't care because it's a talking plant. Yeah.
Because otherwise the musicals numbers don't work. And so two of the things that are in my head is, if we're gonna give this the full thought process, this is a coordinated attack. Audrey 2 isn't the only one. There are, as it says, there are other instances of this going on all around the world, and different stories could be playing out. Some will succeed, some won't. But again, I like the fact you do get two versions of the end of this. So in the theatrical version, it's actually James Belushi turns up and he doesn't have a cutting of the plan, but he has a plan and a contract that says Audrey 2 is great, but we would like to take cuttings and we can then grow it and sell it across America and that sort of thing. In the director's cut, you actually get someone turn up with an Audrey 2 who's like, oh, we stole a cutting, but look, we've managed to cultivate it to be this little plant and we want to sell it. And that's what happens. So I like the fact, but again, it fits into this idea of what's we're looking for? Exploitation. Everybody's looking for. If anything, I actually prefer. Well, they both work for me because someone stole a cutting to come back and like we go, because the guy who steals it says, "Well, I've sort of come back as a courtesy. We don't have to because I've got this plant and you've got no patent on this plant, so I've come back as a courtesy. We're going to do it anyway." And we just want to sort of cut you in. James Belushi, when he comes, he needs, and he's willing to sell it as a contract and all this other thing. So that whole scene, but they both play it in a similar way. It's like there's someone who's gone, this is a good idea. It comes into the whole thing again for me a bit like in Gremlins. There's a similar sentiment in Gremlins when they first sort of find out about the Mogwai. So when the Mogwai first multiply the first time round, and they're all sat there at the bottom of the Christmas tree, and you get sort of Randall Peltzer says, "Could you imagine a Mogwai in every house? They could replace the family pet." And it's the same sentiment where you go, "No, this thing is a little monster. That shouldn't happen." But this idea, and I hear it a lot. Again, it goes into this idea of the American dream. You'll have one in every home in America. Wasn't there a pet rock at one point? And again, it was like someone must have thought the same thing of like, we can sell a rock and they'll have one. Every home in America is going to have a pet rock. Like it's almost like a cliche. It's a joke, but it fits into this idea that like it clearly comes with other information. I'm not going to worry about they are alien. That's fine, and they get this information. But I kind of like the plan relies on the greed of people.
Yeah, and that's a further commentary on sort of these social themes of sort of capitalism and poverty and all of this. And I like that too. I like the satire there of we're more than willing to not really investigate this and push this product out, even though it's going to completely destroy society. There's certainly no due diligence going on there. There's just this is a fad.
Yeah.
And you think about how many horrible products were marketed, especially in the 60s and the 50s. What is that SNL skit where they say, Johnny Astronaut, yes, sir, this is nothing but a plastic bag and a string. I mean, there were a lot of really horrible toys back then. And dangerous ones, but I do like this commentary on capitalism. But again, I always want Seymour to be more culpable. Yeah. And you do see him signing all these different contracts during the Life magazine sort of fame sequence. And I almost think it would be better if, there was a clause in one of those contracts that you signed that lets us do these cuttings anyway. Didn't read the
fine print.
Yeah,
you've already signed this away. This isn't. We're coming as a courtesy, that would actually probably would played better. Like the guy come back and going, look, well, you signed this contract. We don't need you involved anymore, but we've come back as a courtesy because you started it. You know most about how to grow these plants. Blah blah blah. That would have been that'd be an interesting way. The thing for me is, again, like I said, this film comes out in '86. At that point. And it hadn't happened really. It starts in the late 70s, comes into the 80s. Is this idea of the toy for Christmas? What is the toy to have at Christmas? And whether it be like the G.I. Joe aircraft carrier, or like the new version of Optimus Prime, or
call it by its name, the USS Flag.
Okay, I didn't know what that is, and I will one day. We will one day. It was requested, putting it out there, that we do the G.I. Joe movie. We will do it one day. But like that idea of having to rush out and get the toy for Christmas, or like the fad toy, was a real 80s thing, wasn't it? That sort of thing of the shops haven't got, I can pick up, Cliff Jumper, or I can pick up, I can pick up the Winston Zedmore or the Ray Stantz, but I can't. Nowhere selling the Peter Venkman. I'm all out of those.
And all that kind of started with Star Wars, and those toys not being ready, and giving kids a coupon for here's a piece of paper, Merry Christmas.
That still happens. But again, like you say, this idea of the commercial fad toy, like that ending clearly sort of in this whole film sort of like it dives into that again, and it's again why that director's cut ending works so much better. That scene where they're all clamoring to get an Audrey 2 off the shelf to get is so well done. And the fact of the matter is, 86, it gets played out again and again. The film Jingle All the Way with Arnold, that whole film centers around this concept. The start of the film, the Christmas movie about Krampus. Krampus starts with the same thing. This idea of everybody storming in to get the toy, that sort of thing. So it's become a cliche, but again, not in '86. So again, like this thing, is really satirizing quite heavily, sort of like this idea of the American dream, this idea of the American, greed is good in the '80s and stuff. So,
and that the whole, there it's taking the whole sort of like American dream thing of succeeding due to merit, the whole meritocracy bullshit, which we know is a lie, but it's a convenient class structure enforcing lie, and expanding that not just to how it damages these characters and this vortex in which these characters live in, but expanding that to a wider stage on which it's a sort of a wider criticism of capitalist culture, in which something that is fundamentally dangerous, possibly civilization destroying, right? Which is that a metaphor for fossil fuels, is just marketed because you can make money on it, and ultimately it's stupid. Nobody needs this plant except it's been on TV, right? It's like as seen on TV. my parents love this shit, right? It's like,
Yeah.
those are some cheap shells. There's nothing special about them. They're just cheap shells, Mom. But it is that fad. And going past 86, there were those like Cabbage Patch Kids and, you know, the what were the furry sort of the
Care
Beanie
Bears?
Babies
Oh,
and
Beanie
stuff.
Babies. God, yes.
Where parents were having fights in the aisles, you know.
Yeah,
And
and
I remember getting a 1989 Batman TV where the first time I ever saw the Batcave, there was one. And my brother and I both went to it and said, I've got to have it. And we instantly started a fist fight in the aisle that ended with me screaming, I want you dead. And I like, that's the level of just, you know, we both needed that toy.
But that's the
Back
further
to
these
those days,
that is the level of, you know, of like hype these things generated, and you know, as you say, it's I did the same thing, like you say, you know. There are Christmas films based around this stuff. The film that, you know, The Santa Claus with Tim Allen has a whole section at the end about the toy they you know, the toys they didn't get as kids, you know, because they weren't available, whatever. And it's these, you know, this whole sort of thing is very sort of centered around this idea of fad toys and that sort of thing. And so I love all that. I do think that whole ending for that section is so good. And that's what I like about this film. That's what I'm saying is, you know, I think now I've seen it with, you know, I've seen it before, but the integrated director's cut ending, this whole film works as a piece. And it works as a satire of 80s, as you know, and that sort of era, but it still works today. Like, you know, Tamagotchi, I can think of others. I can reel these off things like this idea of what Audrey 2 would be. But yeah, it just works so well, that whole ending. But the other thing as well is the thing about Audrey 2 is the voice. Now I forgot the guy's name, and he was a musician, he was a singer, and I can't believe I've just sort of it's Levi Stubbs, and his voice in this film is so iconic, you know, and everyone's imitated the "Feed me, Seymour." I'm not going to do it when I've done it. And so his singing voice is fantastic, but like even when he's talking and stuff, like it becomes like that. He works as that Faustian sort of manipulator because he's so cool.
Yeah. Well, and it's a sort of like deep baritone, you know, sort of. Yeah. I
don't know. I don't know if that affected you anyway, but like, I just think, like, you know, Audrey 2 is clearly the villain of the piece. Like the laugh and everything, you know, it's so iconic. But it works. So you're just like, yeah, Audrey 2 is cool. Like there's just there's just a sort of which is silly. But it comes back to this thing of being challenged, of going like, no, the villain is going to destroy our planet and, you know, eat us all. But you're going to get a really cool musical number while you do it.
Yeah. Well, I think that, I mean, you're right that Audrey 2 is iconic, and that voice is so important. I also think that, you know, I mean, it's the way in which, like, this is so well put together. I do have criticisms, you know, we might get into a few more, but it is so well put together. And I think it sort of transcends the fun of it to be, I mean, there is a way in which it's got all these layers, it's got all the social criticism, but especially as embodied in the Audrey 2 plot, it is just a fun, over-the-top musical.
Yes.
And, you know, and I love it on that level too. And I think that even the theatrical cut has some of that. But so much of what I like about it is this idea of transgression, is this idea of this is not a Broadway show. This is an off-Broadway show. This would never be a Broadway show until it was made into a movie and revived. But I mean, it is so obviously has more in common with like Rocky Horror than it does with a Disney movie, even though Menken and Ashman went on to do Disney. And I love that there is that sense of underground, of transgression in this film from the start. It's about a guy who feeds people to a plant, you know, and that talking plant. There are so many just zany ideas like that that are unapologetically shoved into the film, and I love it for that kind of underground transgressive feel, which I feel is paid off so magnificently then with the real ending, as it kills the main characters and then cuts and everything you're seeing minute by minute is so shocking and transgressive and electrifying. So I like that underground feel.
No, I agree. And one of the scenes that sort of epitomizes that now for me more than when I was a kid. And I didn't really. I thought it was funny when I was a kid, but I watch it now and I see there's more to it. Is Bill Murray's cameo, which was completely sort of like as we've sort of said with Bill Murray, like he may or may not turn up to set someday, but this was totally like he's not credited. He just did it for a laugh. Him coming into that dentist, and he's got his own sort of wads to put in his mouth and all this other stuff. Like he's ready for it. And some of that scene is you've been shown there's a sadist dentist. Like he's the almost like the ultimate sadist in dentist, and now you're gonna have the ultimate masochist come in and like this Max. But he says like, oh yeah, he said, well I've got this guy. The guy that told me on Tuesday recommended you based on something he heard from the guy I see on Monday. So you've got this list of dentists he sees, and but what's clearer now as I get older, like he's clearly getting off on this. Mm-hmm. Like there's a sexual component to this, and like you watch it, and Steve Martin's Oren Scrivello is like trying all these different tools, and he's got the drill and all these other bits, and the frustration and sort of again this idea of like that he can't get the fear and the screams out of the Bill Murray character is so good. Like it almost breaks him. Like he literally gives in and throws him out. And then he's like to Rick Moranis, is like, does this scare you? Does this tool scare you? And he's like, yes. He's like, good, get in here. And I kind of like that again that you've shown, because you've had the sort of like Be a Dentist song, which is wonderful. I couldn't even say what my favorite song is in this thing, but I do love that whole dentist thing. It's such a great sequence. So you've seen him at his sort of masochistic best or sadistic best. Mm-hmm. And then to have this thing to max him out and to frustrate him and sort of like to see that he has actually got a vulnerability that he can be sort of beaten is, again, kind of transgressive. This idea that like, no, there aren't, he's not just sadist. There's people out there that kind of get off on this thing. It's sort of, kind of weird to have that in the middle of the film, but
and we've seen that earlier, but with the I'll Be a Dentist song. But I like the idea of sublimation, of how we find careers that allow us to do these things that otherwise would be damaging to society. And I often think of it for that reason, although I don't like the Elvis riffs. I mean, there's a few things that I think are a little too cutesy in that song, even though I think of that song all the time. But yeah, the Bill Murray thing, I think of as, yes, it's transgressive. It has this sort of S&M sexuality, which Audrey also is required apparently to carry her own handcuffs.
Yes.
And in one of the earliest lines, she's late again, and Mushnick says, she explained she was tied up, well, actually handcuffed. So yeah, the S&M is transgressive. I do think it, like the Bill Murray, like everything about, okay, you're not going to agree, and I don't really mean this. I like certain things that Bill Murray is in, but I was tempted to say everything that Bill Murray is in is terrible. Like this does not make any sense. The sequence is clearly just indulgent to have fun with a masochist dental patient, and yes, it underlines the sadism, but we already knew that. Bill Murray runs away, and then we see Seymour come in, and the death of the dentist. Bill Murray is not required for that plot, does not really elucidate anything about character. Now, it is fun seeing the masochist opposed to the sadist.
What I would take from it, what I took from it is that, again, as a sadist, like, he needs... he's not just in it to cause the pain. He needs it to be painful. And he knows that Audrey's not really into it. Like, she's doing it to satisfy him. And so what he gets off on is actually hurt. Not in the. I'm trying to sort of like, you know, draw that line between consensual S&M and tantamount to rape is what he's doing. Like, he's clearly, like, you know, the acts he commits on Audrey aren't. Consent would probably be a grey line in there somewhere. But like you say, so I like the fact that what you see with the Steve Martin character is, like, the moment someone does give consent and they're like, yeah, you go wild, you do. He's not into the actual infliction of the pain if the person's into it. Like, it's got to be, and it sort of it hammers that home a little bit. But I like the fact that it frustrates him. Like, it really throws him that, like, oh no, there's someone that is actually into this. Like, I'm not, you know, like, my sadism, you know, just to others is a get off, and I like the fact that really upsets him.
Yeah, I mean, I like that too, but I still think that, I mean, like, part of the problem with Bill Murray is that, you know, he's done a lot of this kind of thing where he's a cameo or a bit player, and he comes in, and yes, I mean, you're right that, you know, especially during this area, there was a problem with him showing up, and he was reportedly on drugs and stuff like this. But the other thing is, he refused to really learn lines, and it wasn't like Steve Martin, who would improvise, like, hey, what if I, you know, twist this doll's head off, right? Bill Murray would just not learn the lines. It would be totally different every time he shot it. And that usually results in wacky sequences that really aren't very good, objectively speaking. And, you know, I like him, you know, like, sometimes he is really into it. Other shots, he seems like he's a little more reserved or pulls back, or, you know, I like him being enthusiastic, but none of it really makes sense in the sense that, I mean, why has this receptionist left? You know, why, you know, Bill Murray's there jumping on a chair. I mean, it's sort of over the top. And then Seymour enters with a gun. Where the hell did he get this? None of this ends up being important. This is actually one of the weakest sequences or portions of the film, because the gun isn't important. Bill Murray isn't important. You know, the receptionist leaving is just this, convenience. And, you know, what I like about what you're saying is, I mean, I do like what it's doing. I think what I like best about it is the way that the dentist says, you know, get out of here, you sicko. Once he can't achieve his sexual desire. So, and I love this sense of projection of, like, you know, in the same sense, like, you know, those devious homosexuals, they're terrible. You know, they're always meeting each other for delightful sex. Oh, it's so easy to give into that, but God says it's a sin. You know, this sort of way in which we're all kinky, you know, and efforts, but, you know, we always think somebody else's kink is the problem. Yeah.
Well, no, you're right. I do like that, the way it ends, because it's a transitional scene, isn't it? Like, it's got to get to the point of the death. But also with Gunn, ultimately it doesn't matter. You're right. Ultimately it doesn't matter. But it's also a line that is crossed. And yes, he doesn't end up using it because of the silly mask, the gas mask thing, which is a bit too silly. That's one of the things, even as a kid, I was like, that's a bit too silly. However, it does show, again, you know, would he does draw it on him, and stuff, but he went there fully intending, like, you know, where did he get it from? Well, they live on Skid Row. I'm pretty sure, you know, there'll be ways and means. And
go through any trash can.
yeah. Just wait long enough. There'll be some planted evidence somewhere or something you can do. But you know, so I'm not sure where he gets it from, but it does show a move in the character of Seymour. Like, he is willing to do this. Like, we've said that, like, you know, he doesn't have agency because everything sort of happens. Like, you know, the dentist dies because of the gassing, but he's going there willing to do this. Like, he is fully on board with killing someone. He's nervous about it, and then he has no compunction about wrapping up a dead body and bringing it home on the tube, on the train. Which again is probably, says a lot about Skid Row in New York in this era, because no one questions what's going on. But
although there is a conspicuous lack of observers,
yes.
I mean, as somebody who's had to drag dead bodies through the streets before, I can tell you it is not this easy.
Yeah, we've all been there. It's sad.
Who hasn't?
But yeah, it shows a turn for the character for me. That's the point. Like with Seymour, like that the choice to take that gun shows that proactively he is willing to do this, or at least thinks he's willing to do it, or is considering it. It's a move towards the dark side. The fact he doesn't do it is the where
he doesn't get a chance to. I mean, which is a cop out, but I agree with you. I agree with everything you're saying. But that would be true if we saw him going through the process of getting that gun and planning it, which again, like chopping up that body, when you actually see that, then Seymour is implicated. And you realize like, oh shit, he's going through the process of getting a gun, even if Audrey 2's helping him, then we'd be like, no, now he's more heavily implicated. Having him miraculously have a gun and nervously go to the dentist makes him seem much more innocent, and it's easier for you to forget. Hold on, wait a minute. He had to track down a gun and bring it to this dentist to murder him in cold blood.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and like you say, but he does chop up. Like, it gets bloody. Like, you see him with an axe, and Mr. Mushnick sees it. One of the only really gory scenes in this film. It's not hugely gory, but you see the blood sort of streaks across the floor, and you see him putting body parts into Audrey 2. So, he has dismembered a body. Like, didn't kill it, but he still dismembered a human body with an axe, which, I'm guessing isn't the easiest thing to do. It's going to be messy. It's going to be, and he did it in the shop, which is probably the silliest thing to do. Like, but at that point, when you watch this version, like I said, the director's cut, it shows a bit more. Like you get the notion that there's more to this. And so that is it. He's bought into it now. He didn't do the killing, but he's bought into this idea of fame and fortune. Going to do whatever it takes to get out of Skid Row, and so this is it now.
Yeah, and I would have less problem with him not killing the dentist and this convenient gas overdose, which, I agree is, a little silly, a little too convenient. And it's just, there are too many contrivances right at that moment. So they sort of pile up and bother me more than something that I could sort of forgive and elide. I could forgive that convenient death more if there was an escalation, and with Mr. Mushnick, if Seymour pushed him into the mouth.
Yes.
Sees what Audrey 2 is doing. Audrey 2 is sort of grabbing him and the mouth is open, and Seymour sees, oh, I don't have to leave forever. I could just one little push, and then we have an escalation from he was willing to kill, but we don't know if he would go through with it, to when it was convenient for him and easy, he was willing to kill. And I would like that kind of escalation rather than,
letting so convenient. He lets Audrey kill Mr. Mushnick. And again,
just like he lets the dentist die from glass. These are sins of omission versus commission.
Yeah, exactly. And so they don't really want him to cross that line. I would be more interested if he did, especially with Mr. Mushnick. Like the dentist, like I say, I can let go, because if anything, that would probably be more in keeping with the tone of this film. Would be, oh, so he's actually going to kill the person that took him in. This bully, this vile person that he's sort of seen in the street. This secondary character, sort of like fine. Mr. Mushnick, he is willing to kill. That would have been an interesting step to protect. He's all right. Well, I'm now making the choice to protect, cover up what I've done by another death, because then it becomes that spiral, doesn't it? Of like, oh, okay, now to cover up this, I've got to do this act to, and it becomes the spiral out of control. And he never quite crosses that line, and it's a little bit. They could even there are even ways they could do it, I suppose, to make it look like we could have been debating. Did he, when he lays his hand on Mr. Mushnick, was he trying to save him or was he pushing him? Like, you know, they could show it in ways where you'd be like, never really sure, but you can read it in that way that he did have a hand in Mushnick's death. But yeah, Seymour, like you say, these things, like you say, it does work because he's so passive. If he was to become proactive in some of this, does that change the theme? You know, we were saying before about the passive good guy. Does he? Because then does he become a bad guy?
Well, I mean, he's a bad guy anyway, right? The good guy.
But there's degrees of that, though, isn't there?
But I think that for me, if he sort of saw the opportunity, it's set up, and his instinct is just to give Mushnick that little push. That's sort of like exactly revealing enough to me for his character, where it's like, I'm the good guy, but when I can do this and it's easy for me and I can get away with it, my instinct is to seize that opportunity. Now, killing somebody with a gun, maybe that's a little too far, but I think I'm a good guy. But when actually presented with an easy opportunity to get rid of a problem,
I'll take it.
My instinct is, push this. It's going to happen anyway. Audrey 2's going to pull him in anyway.
Yeah. No, I see what you mean, and I agree with that. I think that would be an interesting line to draw. However, I don't think it would have made the theatrical cut.
No, it would definitely not. I wanted to go back to the dentist and that scene with Mushkin for a second, because with Mushkin, it's interesting that Mushkin. Mushnick, thank you. He is presented as a good. I mean, he's kind of mean to his employees, right? Especially to Seymour. But there's this remarkable turn for me as he challenges Seymour, like, I saw this murder. I'm going to take you into the cops, and then he sort of keeps the door from opening and says, well, there's another option. I can buy you a ticket out of town and you can lay low for 20 years and I'll take Audrey too and I'll be rich and famous. And if anyone is a good character besides Audrey in this film, it's Mr. Mushkin. And yet Mushnick, thank you. And yet I wrote it down wrong. And yet he when the opportunity presents itself, capitalism perverts him too.
Well, he's one of those characters you've seen it take hold of him, because I say the first thing, when they have that first day, when Audrey's gone in with a black eye, like they don't have a single customer, and he says like, "That's it, we're done. I'm closing the shop," and it's all that sort of thing, and that's when you get introduced Audrey too. And then as it grows more successful, like, you see him sort of like, you see him physically change. Like, he's one of the only characters that physically changes. Seymour is wearing the same clothes. By the end he's wearing a suit, but that's slightly different. But he's still wearing the same sort of like pullover and stuff by about the main of the finale that he is at the beginning. And the same with Audrey. Like, Audrey's still wearing the same clothes and still going through the same thing. It's only Mushnick that changes. Like, at the beginning he's disheveled, his hair's sort of all over, he's unshaven. And then when it starts to be successful, like, he's wearing a nice suit, he's shaven, his hair's clean, he's got his moustache is all sorted, and he's looking like he is fully embracing this, because this is his dream. This is what he's always wanted for this business. And so for him, like, like you say, rich and famous, like, it's fully, he doesn't want to lose this. And I can so see that, like, and it raises the question then, like, he knows now what Audrey 2 needs. So you've just said, "Oh, I'll take on the rich family." He's seen what Audrey 2 needs. So in him trying to send, instead of handing in Seymour to the police and say, but instead saying, "Look, if you just disappear for a time," that's implying then that Mr. Mushnick is going to go, "I'm happy to kill people to sustain Audrey 2," and
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I hadn't thought about that, but that's much like Seymour had to go get the gun. There are these things that aren't quite said or shown that, even in the case of Mushnick, would paint these characters in a worse light.
Yeah, like he's willing to sort of take on that Faustian. He hasn't been a part of the Faustian deal, but he's more than willing to step into the role.
Yeah, he wants in.
Yeah, he said, "Well, if I can get the fame and the fortune and keep all the money, then I'm more than willing to start killing off dentists left, right, and center." So yeah, and that's another character. It's another interesting character. Like one of the interesting things I find in this as well, though, and I think it's more. Again, I can see there's a logistical reason for this. Mushnick's shop stays in Skid Row.
Mm-hmm.
And I would always think, like, because Audrey 2 is the attractor, right? Audrey 2 is the key factor in this, in the success. The flowers become later. But I've known shops that become successful, or businesses or whatever, and one of the first things they will do if they're in a bit of a crappy place in town is, "We've moved to a bigger unit or to a better place," and they have the signs in the windows. And it's interesting that all they do is they just do up the shop. And I get there's a set, they've got to keep it in Skid Row because that's where the characters are and all this other stuff. But still, like, there's this thing of like it's a shop that gets done up, but it's still in crappy Skid Row. So
yeah, I mean, I would put that in you're right, of course. I would put that in the list of things that don't bother me, along with like a singing, dancing plant.
Yeah,
it
doesn't
and
bother
the idea
me.
that you can become famous through horticulture.
Yeah, it doesn't so much bother me, but it's more interesting the fact that, like, they keep highlighting how awful this place is, Skid Row. Yet all these middle class people are willing to come there with money to buy flowers.
And reporters outside,
Yes.
And
yeah. I want to know how many muggings occurred or pickpockets, and how many pockets were picked during this whole section. But yeah, I understand why, because it's got a centre and a location. I know that's the point, but still, it stands out a little bit of like, oh, all these people are coming to the roughest neighbourhood in New York to come and buy flowers. It feels a little sort of shoehorned at times, but it's fine. I understand why.
Well, along with the Audrey Year One prequel movie that we have to make, we now have to make a like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead sort of sidequel to this, as these two pickpockets are like, this is great for us. We can rob all these rich people. They're coming to us for a change.
Yeah, like Oliver Twist, but in that Skid Row for. Yeah.
The other thing I was going to bring up about that Bill Murray sequence, I'm sorry to circle back to that, is, another reason why I find it so incongruous and so silly and over the top is I love the idea of sadism being sublimated into different occupations. And, not my experience, the dentists tend to be that way, but it's a clever song. But when you actually see Bill Murray as the masochistic dental patient, it makes me think that that Steve Martin is so over the top. Who is going to go to this guy? Yeah. It's one thing to be, you're in the chair and there's a natural amount of pain that goes along with dentistry, and it's easy to imagine a dentist sneaking some of his own gas and maybe not fully numbing somebody up. I mean, it's a joke in the song and you can kind of go along with it. But when you actually see Bill Murray as the patient and what Steve Martin wants to do to him, these medieval tools that he has, you think, who the hell is bringing their kids here multiple times?
Yeah. Well, you see the little girl with the like headset brace that starts to explain things to the Bill Murray character, and he's like, well, yes, that's standard procedure. Of course, that's going to happen. And so I have thought that, like, Why would you go there? Like, what's this guy's reputation as a dentist? Yeah, I can't see that he has a large patient list.
Yeah, you'd have to be a little more covert than he is
Yeah.
with Bill Murray.
Yeah. Yeah. The song opens when he pulls in, and he like literally punches out his receptionist to one of his nurses as he walks
Yeah.
into reception. Yeah.
Well, and twists the doll's head off. Who's coming back to that office?
Yeah. It is good. I'm pretty sure there's like a Dentist Association of America that detest and hate this song, this whole thing. But
I'm sure
it's very cartoony, and that's the thing. This film is very cartoony. I mean, just as a side note, this is one of those things. It is played for laughs. Like, it's a comedy, it's a musical, and it's very cartoony, it's very exaggerated, but it's got some very, very dark themes. The thing to don't forget, this was made into a cartoon in the 90s.
Was it really?
They turned this into a cartoon series, a Saturday morning cartoon series, Little Shop of Horrors, yes. Which is another one of those things where you sort of go, someone in an office somewhere went, that IP we've got about a plant that kills people and eats them to take over the world. Kids love that.
Well,
We'll put it on. We'll put it next to the Rambo, RoboCop, and Beetlejuice cartoon.
Yeah, and I love that tradition of that 80s thing, and it really ends the sort of like the first few years of the 90s of R-rated stuff and inappropriate kid stuff. Because look, I mean, I watched Akira. I wanted adult content, right, in cartoons, and now we have it, kind of. But no, that's awesome. But what it suggests to me is I kind of have a dim memory, whether I'm inventing it or not, of that cartoon Audrey 2. And what it reminds me of is exactly your point about how Audrey 2 is, because of that voice, Audrey 2 is charming and sort of iconic. Yeah. And you can almost forget that this is a horrible story about horrible people doing horrible things.
Well, I think that's it, because it's presented in such a cartoonish way. And again, this is one of those things that like Tim Burton can do well. Like, I watch Edward Scissorhands in a similar way. Like, you watch Edward Scissorhands, and it's beautiful, absolutely beautiful film. Like, and then you dig into actually, this film's really like, about some of the stuff in that film is really dark and really like heartbreaking. But again, it happens in this film. But the other thing I want to point out, you say about the cartoonishness of this, and I think it helps because this film could, God knows what there is a remake in the offing, and it's got like Scarlett Johansson and Chris Evans and Taron Egerton in and all this other stuff, and I'm like, yeah, like, looking at that cast is where you go, you don't understand what this film was, do you? Like, you don't get it. But the point is, the Audrey 2 being a puppet. And I wanted to quickly touch on Audrey 2 as the puppetry behind it. It's a musical. It's awesome. But if you tried to play this too straight, like, because Audrey 2 has to be a puppet, like, it wouldn't work. You need that comedy and that cartoonishness to be able to buy into. That suspension of disbelief has to be consistent across the board for you not just to buy into a talking plant, but into the way it works and that sort of thing. But the thing I want to sort of really throw massive props to is the design of Audrey 2. From the first bud, let's just call it that, which again, in the director's cut, when you see the second bud, like later on, when the guy finds him on the roof, and the little one smiles at Seymour when they tell him the plan. Pitch perfect, absolutely fantastic. But also the design of sort of like, so the growing Audrey when they go to the radio station, and when it opens its mouth and the tongue comes out, but the tongue is surrounded by leaf and foliage and stuff inside. The detail is absolutely phenomenal, all the way through to fully grown Audrey 2, and the way the lips move and the inside of the mouth, because they know that like this is one of those films where when I got this on Blu-ray, like I hadn't seen it for a few years. I thought, I've got this on Blu-ray, it's going to be in high def, it's probably going to look a bit cack. Like, you're going to see the seams, you're going to look at Audrey 2, and it's going to look like it's made of latex or whatever. And there's parts where I'm like, no, I completely buy into this plan. Like, I'm watching it as a character. And I think it's a real testament to the model making, and the puppetry of this is absolutely phenomenal, which obviously comes from Frank Oz, and they used Jim Henson Studios. But I don't know, it's just for me, I'm always impressed by practical effects. It's just some of the best practical effects of the 80s in this film.
Well, and you combine that with the models at the end of the $5 million jettisoned, climax. It really, and apparently the people who worked on that climax worked on it for a full year or something, and then got a phone call like, yeah, that thing you just devoted your life to, you got paid, but we're not going to use any of it.
It's the fact that, to just say, I love the fact that, like you say, and this is the thing of this age, it got dug out. Like, that was almost lost as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that was found and brought back. Like, the studio was not only willing to throw it away, it was willing to forget about it, and I find that baffling.
Well, apparently there was. This was the first DVD recall supposedly in history, because they put out a DVD that had, that Geffen did or whatever, the studio, that had black and white footage of the ending, because that's all the studio had, and it was bad sound and black and white and terrible. And I think it was Geffen who said, "Oh, I've got a copy of." First of all, don't put that out; it's horrible, and they had to destroy all those DVDs. But then I think Geffen had a copy of it and was like, "Oh, I've got a color copy," And then they wound up putting together this thing that Frank Oz approved as the director's cut. But apparently there were like 6 different sizes of Audrey 2, and it was like 60 or 90 different puppeteers manipulating the full size one. How does that even work? That's got to be
the coordination in that.
Yeah, like imagine like how far off the set those 60 people are standing, all pulling little things.
Well, there are scenes in this film, in both versions, where Audrey 2 isn't just they're not just talking to a plant. Like there's things where it's just up, but like it sings, and it sings, and I believe it's a plant that's singing. Like, you take it because the lips are moving, but not even the big things, not even just the big overacting that you can get from a puppet. Like, even some of the expression, like when he knows he has manipulated Seymour, and you get the sort of like and it's sort of like it smirks and stuff, like the little things. It's so well thought out as a puppet. Like I said, I don't know how many people are working on this thing. Like I say, it sounds like tens of people pulling the strings on this thing. And then to act with it, and to do everything with it, and to coordinate it with the singing and the lighting and everything, like it's but just the look of it. Like, I know this is based on a 1962 Roger Corman film. I've never seen the original. I don't think I want to. I don't think it'd be that sort of thing. Maybe one day I'll try it out. But the puppetry and the special effects artistry that's used in the design is I can't praise it enough. It's one of those sort of like physical things. It's just so impressive.
No, I agree with you, and I think that. A couple of things that stand out for me that I really appreciate about the design, especially the big Audrey 2, is that I sort of feel like the inside of the mouth is a little too blue. It's especially when you get up to the big size, it does look more plasticky. And inside the mouth, I like the leaves, but the colors feel a little day-glow or off to me. But there are sort of how to describe it, sort of like fleshy bits at the back of the throat.
Yes.
It's such a wonderful, that look like an animal, imperfect bits at the back of that really sell you on, like, no, this isn't just a made up mouth with some leaves for contouring. Like, this is some horrible alien thing. And the other thing is, even though it does look more plasticky in the bigger model, the sort of like indentions around the lips that just look like, yeah, I can buy that. That looks really good. I will say that it is clear that the voice of Audrey 2, as celebrated is a black individual. Okay,
Yes.
African American. Am I wrong in pointing out that Audrey 2 has super big lips? Is that racist?
It's, you know what, you're not. Yeah, it crossed my mind. Um, I don't know. Because again, you could say, because don't forget, when the lips are together,
Mhm.
it forms a bud. So you get that design. So it works in that sense as well, that you get that sort of like the lips forming the budding. I don't know.
I'm just putting that out there so it's
Yeah.
documented. We've mentioned it. We both thought about it. You know, we're not probably the best people to comment on that, the most
No.
qualified people. Yeah. Well, I mean, I was also reading about the puppetry, and apparently they were really struggling, Frank Oz was, to get it looking right.
Mm.
And eventually, what they realized was that the puppetry was so intricate that what they had to do was film it at like 12 frames a second or something, and then speed it up. So everything is in slow-mo. So when they have characters, when Rick Moranis is interacting with Audrey, he's speaking like this. And they would have to mouth in slow motion their lines to then lip sync it later.
Wow.
So everybody is sort of doing a Doctor Who kind of like slow motion. You know.
That's fascinating. Yeah, it's just one of those. I would love to see. You know, I'm sure that I look at the big book of like how this was done. I think it's so clever. I'm always impressed by puppetry. Like, so I'm not one of these that thinks like, you know, oh, down with CGI, it looks awful. No, CGI is great. It's given us some fantastic things. But I'm also in the day, like when CGI wasn't available and they do something like this, like it just deserves a round of applause. It's the same with like, you know, the silly things like Star Wars or the model work on those things, or even like Batman '89. You know, when you see the models of the Gothic, but you know, Gotham
Yeah.
City, and you see the matte paintings that go into this sort of stuff. I'm always impressed with these practical effects. I think they are so impressive, and this is just another one to add to that list.
Yeah, and they look cool. And
Mm.
they do sell the reality. I mean, you and I are both fans of the same stuff. Of, you know, I love a good matte painting. I mean, to me, a good matte painting looks so much better than, not that, again, I'm not against CGI, but I think your point is very well made that not only if they remade this, would the actors be a problem, because actors like to portray good guys, most of them, and you know, Chris Evans is the absolute wrong person for any role in this, you know, about these characters.
According to what I just read, it was Scarlett Johansson as Audrey, Chris Evans as the dentist, and Taron Egerton as Seymour Krelborn. So,
well, you know, we'll see whether anything really happens. But
yeah.
I share a similar suspicion that a CG Audrey 2 either winds up looking too realistic and it loses that cartoony, transgressive underground, you know, edge that I love so much about this movie, or it looks too cartoony, and you think, you know,
Doesn't fit. Yeah.
Why am I in Space Jam? You know.
Yeah. The uncanny valley sort of effect of like it doesn't quite fit in with the background or within the world. Yeah. I'm never against a remake. You know, if I was, well, ridiculous, we wouldn't have things like The Thing or The Fly. You know, there's so
this is a remake.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, this is a remake. So we're literally talking about a remake.
A musical that was remaking a Roger Corman movie, for God's sake, and that musical was then remade as a movie.
Yeah. So I've got no problem with that. So, you know, if they want to do it, fine. It may be good, maybe bad. I'm not going to until I ever see anything. But what was it? Let's sort of just round out then. So final thoughts then on Little Shop of Horrors from 1986.
I love that transgressive underground flair to it, and that this was a major release, something we saw as kids that, you know, has that feel to it. Ultimately, I am amazed by how, in retrospect, I mean, I liked this as a kid. I liked the music more than I liked the actual movie. And I think having seen, and thank you for enlightening me, having seen the actual film, the director's cut, I feel as if the original is sort of like a B- range. The music is good. There are songs that are better than others. The music is catchy. Some of it is really famous, deservedly so. But the movie has a lot of problems and is ultimately a sort of slightly above average, musical with some really interesting stuff and some major flaws. I feel as if the director's cut is just undoubtedly in the A range, and the level of just delight that I have watching this is hard to describe. I just love the movie. I have rediscovered more love than I ever had for this film as a result of discovering that director's cut. So thank you for pointing me in that direction.
No, well, thank God that they released it. I mean, I've got the sort of they released the director's cut. It comes with a commentary and stuff and that. So I for the alternative, and I haven't listened to all that yet. But it's one of those films, as you say. Like, I watched this as a kid, and even theatrical version, there are moments in this where I'm like, man, we watched some stuff in the 80s when I was like, stuff got past things in the 80s like you wouldn't get away with now. And I know that's a sort of a cliche to say that, but it's so true. Like, this film starts with a woman suffering from domestic violence and then turns it into a song number. And I'd have been sort of, as a kid, like, downtown, da, 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 da. Like, it's crazy that no one, like, my parents clearly weren't paying attention. But Frank Oz, got this past the people. And like you say, for years to me, this is a sort of a happy, upbeat, redemptive musical. For years, and it was something, as you said, I probably loved the music more than the film, and sort of like Mean Green Mother, and sort of Don't Feed the Plants, and all the songs I really love. And then when I heard about the alternative, and I saw it on YouTube, and I was like, oh, this is amazing. Why was this not put in? And then it was released, and I see the director's intent, and you see what Frank Oz was doing. And you can see why Disney don't want to work with him, or are scared of working with him these days, because he probably doesn't care and wants to make something similar to this. But it's clear that he was like, no, I have a vision. I want to sort of like, I'm going to sort of poke fun at those 50s monster films and all these other bits and pieces, and I'm going to satirize sort of like, 80s America and all these other things. And I'm going to have this ending. I mean, it's going to be amazing, and we're going to go full bore on it, and it's going to be, and it is, as you say, wonderful. The director's cut of this film is a different cinematic experience to the theatrical version. But this isn't just one of those things where they say, "Oh, the director's cut, we've added in an extra few minutes." No, this is a completely different film. The themes and the intent is completely different, and I'm so glad that they gave us this version. It's brilliant. It's absolutely phenomenal. The ending of this film is the film's great. I actually like a lot about this film. It still has problems, as we've pointed out. It's got no film is perfect, but that whole sequence at the end, and the fact of the matter is, like, I love the fact that although the alternative versions only ever released on Blu-ray, this full package, the director's cut, the film ends, and I'd love to see this in the cinema, because the film ends with an auditor bursting through a cinema screen. Like, it's supposed to give you that moment and stuff. And so even stuff like that, like clever little ideas throughout this film are so good. And it's well done. So it's well worth revisiting. So what I will say is, and I will put this out before this, you'll probably see me tweeting about it. So before this film goes out, before this show goes out, I'll be tweeting about it. I want people to hunt down and watch the theatrical version. Fine. But go and try and at least find the alternative ending on YouTube, or watch the director's cut will be my recommendation, because it's such a good film, absolutely fantastic. I'm so glad we watched this. But yeah,
amen, brother.
It's a good. It's been a doozy. This is a really good film. But the fun doesn't stop there, because I'm going to check. I often have a list of what we're going to have, and I need to check what is next. We are still in the.
Demolition Man from 1993.
So we've gone from a film that you were delighted I made you watch, to one that I'm still not entirely sure how it will go down. But
I think we agreed on Little Shop of Horrors. I think that was a mutual,
Yes,
because
that was between us.
you had clued me into the ending, and then
Yes.
I would talk to you the next week and was like, "Oh my god, man, I love this! I've watched that alternate ending like 20 times. I love it so much." So yeah, I mean, we'll see whether Demolition Man is a man who fell to earth, as in something you made me watch that I will bow down and thank you
Yeah.
for, or more a Buckaroo Banzai.
Yeah. I think I know.
I have seen most of it, but mostly on TV when I'm not paying
Yeah.
attention.
It's an interesting film. I have recently done, and I'll wrap on this. I recently did sort of a mini retrospective with on 20th Century Geek. We called it Standalone Stallone, and it was basically sort of looking at four of his own sort of standalone movies. And one of the things I sort of find with Stallone is, like, he makes good choices. Like, there aren't many Stallone films where you go, that's a real... Like, there was a period from like 1990 to 93 where he made a couple of stinkers, and Demolition Man got him out of it. Cliffhanger and Demolition Man in 1993 got him out of a rut and really established him again as a 90s action star. And so it's interesting to see, like, you know, why he came back to this genre. And I think there's something to say about Demolition Man. It's got some interesting concepts in, and I'll put in inverted commas, interesting performances.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, the standalone Stallone. I mean, and talking about the redemption of Stallone. Did you tackle by any chance Stop or My Mom Will Shoot?
No, that was in his bad choices. That was we tackled Nighthawks, Cobra, Cliffhanger, and Daylight. But between, like, there's a run. Like, if you look, there's like Oscar, Stop and My Mom Will Shoot, and something else. I can't remember what it was. They were like all flops.
For good reason.
Yes, and then he came back with Cliffhanger and Demolition Man.
Okay.
But we will address Stallone and the rest of the cast in the next episode. But
so for those of you listening, don't forget about our sister podcast, 20th Century Geek. Scott, I have to admit, you are good even when I'm not on. I mean, it's hard for me to say that. It pains my heart. So I would recommend everyone check that out, subscribe, review and rate both of these podcasts. And don't forget, we're on Twitter at PodTimeSpace, and we're also on Patreon. If you look up 20th, I think it's 20th.
It's patreon.com/20cg media is now what we're under. And one of the key things that Julia and I, if you do like what Julia and I are doing, we do a weekly sort of like dip into, we're calling it Trekking Through the Twilight Zone, and we are going through all the Twilight Zone episodes and giving our thoughts on each of those. And that's been a fascinating doozy. I don't know how really actually when this comes out, but we actually did a double header. It's coming up about, I was going to say, the people of Bourbon Street. Then what's it called? The
Monsters Are Due on Maple Street.
The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. It was a fantastic guest. So that was a good double header of both the original and the remake from 2003. So go check that out. There's a whole other bunch of stuff on there, behind the scenes stuff, and all the bits and pieces of podcast. But it's a great Patreon and keeps the lights on, really, at 20th Century Media Towers. So
that's located right between the Avengers Tower and the LexCorp Tower, I think.
Yeah, at the moment I'm stealing both their sort of Wi-Fi and electricity. We need more patrons.
Amen.
Yeah. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I hope you're enjoying it. And the big thing as well, if you do enjoy this, just go and, like as Julian said, go and leave us a review and get in contact. We're happy to talk about any of these films. We really enjoy it. But for now, thank you very much. And we shall see you in the future.
There's something very important I forgot
across the streams.